I still have a couple of questions for you, so I hope you have time for them. It leads me to the question that I wanted to ask you on this election. But allow me to segue back because I have to ask you about a flashpoint in my life, which was 2008. And it wasn't the election of President Obama, but it was the treatment of Jeremiah Wright. And it was a flashpoint for me because I know you come from the church tradition and I come from the church tradition. And one of the things that jumped out on the pages of my life during that time was the inability of the black church institution to even stand up during this period to even protect Jeremiah's rights, constitutional right to preach the liberation gospel, the gospel in general. And the reason I bring this up is because you said something on Bill Moyer's interview that made me drop my water pitcher and run and tell everybody, like the lady at the well. You said that there is emerging a theology that is perfect for neoliberalism, and you were speaking of the prosperity gospel. Could you speak to that assessment of prosperity gospel, and do you see any connection to the prosperity gospel and the laying down of our arms, even in 2008 with Jeremiah Wright as a small example?
Sure. We always tell ourselves the story. First of all, we need to just kind of disrupt the particular narrative we have of black churches, right? That we tell ourselves a story that black churches are the site for a kind of prophetic witness. And when you look at it in its details, we know that most of the black churches in the context of the civil rights movement did not open their doors. That many of them, particularly in Birmingham, for example, were not, shall we say, courageous sites of struggle. So we have to tell ourselves a more complicated story about the history of black church. In 1903, Du Bois writes in Of the Faith of the Fathers that our churches are differentiating. Some are just becoming social entertainment spaces, right? And others are just high church, right? Formal spaces, right? So in 1903, Du Bois is already noting, right, a strand of black church practice that's kind of driven by a kind of consumer ethic, a kind of narcissism, and a preoccupation with the self. So here we have prosperity gospel. Prosperity gospel, we can talk about it in terms of word of faith, where your W-2s are more important than your soul, right? And so what you see in many of these churches, right, is a kind of gospel that makes it easy to say that your condition is actually your fault. So if you're not thriving, right, if you haven't received that blessing, you haven't sown the seed properly. Right. And so it's almost like a version of a culture of poverty argument that you are responsible for your condition and only you can get yourself out of it. So prosperity gospel doesn't lend itself to a critique of the money changers because they're the money changers. Right? So you can't imagine can you imagine a prosperity preacher in the temple turning over the money changers, throwing them out? No, he's trying to figure out how he can negotiate deals, right? What does it mean when a preacher says the Lord told him he needed a new Lear jet, right? I mean, these are exaggerated examples, but the point is that you have word of faith, prosperity gospel that lets institutions and structures off the hook. And I don't believe this is a gospel that is consistent with a prophetic witness. Right. And that's not to say that there aren't prophetic voices out there, because there are. I mean, there's some amazing prophetic pastors across the country doing amazing work. But what we see is a gospel that's perfect for these neoliberal economic times. A gospel that in some ways tames and arrests the radical energies of the most important institution historically in black life. So absolutely.
And I love that you tie that right back into one of the other themes in your book. In your book, you also talk about our inability to see beyond the meritocracy, our belief that if we're not successful, that it's simply our fault, and how you didn't discuss this particularly in your book, that the church is the prosperity gospel in many ways is really the Pied Piper, or the one that's ushering in this idea into our psyche that if we're not successful, we just didn't work hard enough. But instead of looking at the underlying institution, you discuss this in terms of, we feel that if if America was simply more racially diverse and opportunities were truly equal, that we could get a piece of the pie. And our desire is to get the piece of the pie instead of realizing that the fundamental way the pie is constituted is the problem in the first place. That the way the money is made here, the money changers, as you said, in the temple, the structure of our system is a fundamental problem above and beyond any effort that we can put into it. Tie that into in the terms of the meritocracy, this idea that if we just get the right education, if we just go to the right schools, if we just get the right internship and just get the right job and we work extra hard, then everything in America is fine. And then the opposite of that argument, which is if you don't achieve these things, then it's because you're the problem and not the system.
Right. So I mean, this is the answer, right? That many folk give, that education is the key to success in this country. And what we do know is that we have more and more, young folk falling into debt because when student loan debt has surpassed credit card debt in this country, and there's no guarantee that a college degree will result in economic mobility, will result in an exponential increase in one's life chances. Although we know that if you only have a high school degree, it certainly does not bode well for you. But the idea that the country is predicated upon a kind of meritocracy helps us not pay attention to the very structured ways in which greed, money is passed on from one generation to the next. The very ways in which the top 0.1% and top 1%, top 1/10 and the top 1% continues to gain all the wealth, even as some of us are trying to retool and gain the education and the like in order to move up. I mean, you give this example, right? There's this, social scientist at Rutgers did this study where they interviewed all of these white workers, and they were saying that, the problem with black folk is that they're lazy. They don't want to work. They don't want to earn things for themselves. And then it turned out that one of the respondents, the person who's made that claim, Brother Benjamin, his father was very close with the president of the local union, which helped him get a job. We want to call that merit. Or another person was saying that, these folks are so damn lazy, they just want a handout. Turned out that his close friend not only gave him the test, but gave him the answers to the test, right? So what we see are these social networks, right? As Nancy Tomasino says, these social networks that pass opportunities along and within themselves. And our social networks are homogeneous. They are 75% homogeneous, right? That is to say that most of our social networks, if you're white, happen to be all white. And not only are they mostly white, they all think alike. And so when you start talking about merit, that's all you got to do is get an education and work hard and you can achieve the American dream, we know that's not true because opportunity hoarding is rampant in this country. So opportunities don't come to certain segments of the population in the same way that they come by others. And so, the illusion that this is a meritocracy, right, hides the fact that our class structure is as rigid, if not more so, than the class structure of England. So if you're born in poverty, Brother Benjamin, more than likely you're going to die in poverty, and your children are going to grow up in poverty. We used to have a class structure that looked like an hourglass. Now it looks like a golf club.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
So I mean, this is the reality of the situation in which we find ourselves, and it requires, again, right, a kind of an unflinching criticism, right, of our current arrangements, and not to play these games and engage in this polite speech. We need to start telling the truth so that we can actually address the suffering in our communities.